Good morning and welcome to the first Women in Local Government Future Leaders webinar, Communicating with Credibility, Confidence and Influence. My name is Catherine Carter. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Local Government Professionals Australia, the national body that represents the 200,000 Australians who work for local government around the country. We're webcasting from Canberra, which is Ngunnawal country, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land. I acknowledge and pay my respects to the Ngunnawal people's continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and region. I also acknowledge and welcome Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be participating today. The purpose of this new webinar series is to share practical work skills tailored especially for women in local government. We want to encourage emerging leaders. Specifically, we want to increase the number of women in the executive management ranks of local government. So over the next 2 years, with the support of the Commonwealth Government's Office for Women, we'll be showcasing different experts in leadership and career advancement, female leaders from local government and councils that have successfully implemented programs to develop diversity and inclusion. Our first guest pretty much ticks all three of those boxes. Dr. Neryl East is a specialist in local government leadership and communications. She is the convener of the Local Government Communication Professionals Network, an author, a former broadcast journalist, and now principal of her own communications and coaching business with an extensive local government client list of regional and city councils. Neryl is also a highly sought after presenter and public speaker. She's an expert in communicating in spotlight situations, and today she's going to teach us how to do it too. Before I hand over to Neryl, I want to assure you there will be plenty of time for questions. Please type them into the discussion box as you think of them, and I'll put them to Neryl in the second half of this webcast. Neryl, thank you and welcome.
Thanks so much. What a warm welcome, Catherine. Hi, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here for this kick-off session of this webinar series. Absolutely fantastic. And look, really thinking of those of you who are in our flood-prone areas at the moment. What crazy times we've been through, and now this as well. So I hope you're all going okay. So how much did we love the Winter Olympics? Did you watch it? What was your favourite event? I can't go past the ice skating. Always a popular one, isn't it? I have to confess, I'm a bit of an Olympic junkie. How about you? In Sydney 2000, I actually represented Australia at the hockey, but I didn't have a hockey stick. I had one of these. Can you see that? A microphone. I was an announcer at the hockey in Sydney 2000. Now, I know some of you watching were probably watching those Olympics from your playpens, but some of you probably saw them, and if so, you might have heard my voice at the hockey. Now, you can see on the screen there, I'm up there. You might be wondering which one I am. Well, I'm not the bloke, and I'm not the older lady. Come on, it's over 20 years ago. There I am there. There you go. And I remember my very first game that I had to announce, 20,000 people in the stands. Can you imagine? Millions watching on television. And here I am sitting at the desk, microphone in front of me. The producer counts me in, and I have to say my very first words. And I kid you not, I had to hang onto the desk because that was the only thing that was stopping me from passing out. So I wonder, are there times when you feel like that? Maybe it's when you've got to have a difficult conversation with a team member, or you need to speak in front of a group, or maybe even for some of you speak at a council meeting. Do you get that situation where everything just kind of goes out the window and you freeze, and perhaps you don't then feel that you perform at your best, at your most confident? I'd love to kick off with a poll so that you get to get involved in this conversation. I want to ask you a question about how you feel when you're communicating in front of others. Oh, thanks. Brenda's just thrown the questions up there. So when you have to communicate in front of a group, I'd love you to pick one of these. Are you calm and confident most of the time? Do you feel nervous but you can push through it? Do you lose sleep over it? Or actually, would you rather go to the dentist? Let's just see the answers coming through. This is cool. We can see this in real time. Nobody's voting for the dentist yet, so that's interesting. Okay, thanks for playing along. So isn't that fascinating? So we've got a lot of people on the call today who feel nervous, and you're able to push through it. Brilliant. Others of you actually get to a point where it does affect your performance. But well done to all of you, because in the moment in local government, we've got to keep going, don't we? I want to suggest to you that this is actually your time to shine as a local government professional, whether you're a leader now or whether you aspire to be. Because when you think about it, trust in other tiers of government is at an all-time low. Trust in media is at an all-time low, but we kind of fly under the radar in local government. And during COVID and everything else, we've been the ones joining the dots together for our communities. So I want to suggest that there's never been a more important time for you to develop your skills as a confident, credible communicator. If you just want to throw that slide up again for me, Simon, to think about your levels of trust that you're building, because you don't want to be like the actress Lily Tomlin, who said, "I always wanted to be somebody, but now I realize I should have been more specific." Isn't that a great quote? I wonder if you can relate to that in your role in your council. Are you defining who you are by being able to speak up with confidence, or are other people kind of defining you in lieu of you feeling confident, stepping up in those high stakes situations? So we want to focus a little bit on credibility and how you can demonstrate more of it. So I'm keen to hear your thoughts. Let's do another poll. That first one was so good. Let's do it again. Couple up another question for you when it comes to credibility. Thanks, Brenda. What do you think here? For a leader to be credible, they need to focus most on, what do you think? Knowing their stuff, being relatable, not stumbling over their words, or wearing awesome shoes. That's got to count for something. Come on. Okay, interesting. Thank you. Oh, look at this. Oh, this is like watching a horse race, kind of going back and forth. So we've got quite a few voting for knowing their stuff, quite a few voting for being relatable. It's going up and down. Fascinating watching this in real time. Thanks so much for playing along. I probably was a little bit unfair in this poll because I made you choose one option. Sometimes that makes us kind of choose a priority, doesn't it? Look at that, how they've come out. Fantastic. So pretty strong on both knowing their stuff and on being relatable. And that is pretty much on the money. If you had a hard time picking one, you're on the right track. Because I want to say to you, I work with a lot of very senior leaders, and I want to share with you in this short session the three things that I believe makes them really stand out as confident, credible communicators. And the first one of those is that they really understand what I call the balance of credibility. It's actually a balancing act. What I mean by that, and insights here come from a fantastic book called The Speed of Trust. Have you read that one? It's by Stephen M.R. Covey. He's the son of the more famous Stephen Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So Stephen Covey Jr. talks about the fact that for you to be credible, you need 2 qualities and you need to have them equally. The first one is you need to demonstrate your competence. Probably no surprise there, is nobody's going to consider you credible if you don't come across as knowing what you're doing. So this is about being good at what you do, but also being known for being good at what you do. And I wonder if you agree with me that in local government, often among women leaders, we're not always as good at being known for being good at what we do. We expect other people to just kind of pick up that vibe or watch our results, rather than us having the confidence to kind of step into our own greatness. It's been really interesting here in New South Wales, where I am. You might know that we had a council election postponed twice. We finally got there at the beginning of December. And so all the new councillors are now going through their inductions. And candidates couldn't hand out how to vote information. So we've had all these huge turnover, different people coming onto councils, a lot of women, and in fact, a lot of mayors popularly elected who've never been on council before. So I was coaching a particular mayor, a woman mayor, on council for the first time. And as I was helping her with some media interview techniques, but I could see she was self-filtering. I could just about hear her inner critic coming through in everything she said. And so we had to stop. And I said to her, You need to buy what you're selling. Here's a person clearly articulate, clearly extremely well connected. She'd got herself elected as mayor without ever being on council before in one of the biggest LGAs in Sydney. She was good at what she did. Now she had to buy her own product. So that's a message for you today. If that's an area that you need to work on, how can you buy what you're selling to others when you're having a conversation, whether you're in a meeting, if you've got to do a presentation? You need to buy your own message first. But that's only one half of the balance of credibility. The other half relates to one of the other questions in that poll is you've got to have what Stephen Covey Jr. says, character. And this is all about your level of connection, your level of relatability to your audience. So you've got to have it in balance. If you're all subject matter expert with no connection, you're going to come across as what I call a dry disseminator. You probably know people like that. You know, they're clever, but they're boring. People don't listen to them because they're not relatable. On the other hand, if you're all connection and relatability and no substance, you'll be the most popular person in the room, but you'll come across as a likable lightweight. So thinking about your own communication style, I wonder which of those you need to put a little bit more weight on to balance up the evenness of those scales. Now, I wonder if I were to ask you, and this isn't a poll, I'm just going to ask you to think of this. If you could think about a leader on the world stage over the last couple of years who you think really embodies both of those elements, the competence and the character, I wonder who it would be. And I just like you to bring that leader to mind because, I've done a lot of online presentations the last couple of years. I reckon I've got pretty good at reading people's minds through the screen. So think of that leader and let me see if I can get a vibe coming through. Something's coming. I think many of you are thinking about this person. Am I right? Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. But I talk to a lot of groups, and Jacinda Ardern, her name comes up time and time again as a leader who really nails that balance. And that helps to explain why I reckon half the world's got a crush on Jacinda. And I know in New Zealand she's gone off the boil a little bit politically, but here in Australia we recognise her qualities because she really nails this balance. And it is like yin and yang. I mean, she's got that competence. Who can forget that steely edged resolve after the Christchurch shootings when she was every inch the credible leader? And then on the other hand, she's got this lovely realness to her. She's very, very relatable and she's prepared to be a little bit vulnerable to even up that balance. One of my mentors, Michael Grinder, fantastic non-verbal communication expert, puts it slightly differently. I wonder if you can relate to this. He says that we each have two sides to our character as communicators. On the one side, we're dogs. And I don't mean mangy dogs. I mean playful puppies. Think about the way a puppy communicates. It's all about the eyes, isn't it? The eye contact. It really wants to relate to you. Please like me. Please pat me. Please play with me. Please feed me. It moves around a lot and it's always trying to engage with you. So maybe you are a very puppy-like communicator. On the other hand, there are people who are predominantly cat-like communicators. That cat's yawning, it's not growling. But think about a cat and its general vibe. It's pretty aloof, isn't it? Unlike a puppy that comes to you, a cat, unless it's hungry, will generally hang back and let you come to it. It's much more still in its body. It's much more calm in its demeanor most of the time. I saw a great meme recently that had a series of photos of rooms in a house, and each photo had the same cat just in the corner of the frame. And the text said, "A cat is the only animal that will follow you from room to room just to prove that it's ignoring you." Maybe you've got a cat. Maybe you can relate to that. So we each have those characteristics. We can be very puppy-like, or we can be very cat-like. Ideally, as credible leaders, we want to be somewhere in the middle so that we can flex our style depending on the situation. But more often than not, we tend to one more than the other. So I'd love you to think about your own style. If you're very puppy-like, as I am, and you need to go into a meeting where demonstrating your confidence and credibility is important, even if you're not totally feeling it inside, what I tend to do is say to myself, think cat, think cat. And running that little mantra just helps me center myself and makes me more still. It makes me stand a little taller. And I'm much less likely to kind of babble on and jump in because I'm nervous. Much more likely to take a break and take a breath and wait until the right time to speak. Maybe that's something that you can relate to. On the other hand, perhaps you're already a very cat-like communicator. Doesn't necessarily mean you're always confident, but perhaps you do have that characteristic about you. And you risk then coming across as a little aloof, not connecting with people as much as you need to if you're to have that balance of credibility. So it's really important if you have a strong cat-like part of your communication style to really think about your audience and who you're speaking to. Friend of mine, we'll call him Wazza. He's a great storyteller. He's got a story for every occasion. And he was telling me a couple of weeks ago that he had to go to a building site. He works for a construction company. So he goes to big building sites where he frequently has to do a safety induction. So, we're in local government. We understand, we understand that concept. But often the safety induction is the same every time. So everybody's heard the same information. It's just a bit of a tick a box exercise. So Wazza had to go as a half-day induction, and he wasn't looking forward to it. He'd heard it all before. He got to the site, walked into the training room, and there were 11 other people in the room. Nobody said anything when he came in. They were all looking bored. He sat down. A few minutes later, the trainer walks in, again, not connecting, not making eye contact with anybody, and he just gets into this kind of droning spiel about this safety process that they had to learn about. Nobody's really paying any attention. An hour and a half in to this session, 90 minutes in, it became evident, I'm not quite sure how, the trainer finally realised that 11 of the 12 people in that room, my friend Wazza being the only exception, spoke only Spanish. No wonder they weren't engaging, but he didn't even know. So here's a tip. If you want to connect with the people you're communicating with, you need to speak the same language as them, literally. But of course, you need to speak the same language as them in so many other ways as well. So this is where thinking about your cat or dog style can be really important. If you're having a meeting with an executive and you perceive that they're predominantly very cat-like, you can match their style. They are going to perceive you as being more credible and confident, as I say, even if you're not feeling it 100%. If you're having a conversation with somebody who's very puppy-like, who really wants to engage and connect with you, you can flex your style so that you connect. But either way, think about your audience. Effective communication is always about the other person. It's less about you. Social researcher Hugh Mackay puts it this way. This is one of my favourite quotes. It's the message people take away, not the message we send, that determines our success as a communicator. Just want to let that land for a second. The message people take away. So much of the time we feel nervous, we lack confidence because we're focusing on ourselves and how we feel. What I found is one of the quickest ways to fast track confidence, or at least to take your mind off not feeling confident, is to put your focus on the others in the interaction. Make it about them, not thinking about what they're thinking about you. I don't mean that. Focus on them and what they need from you in that moment. How can you serve them in that moment? That's what effective leaders do to be confident, credible, and influential, even if perhaps they're quaking on the inside, which many of them are. So that's one thing that they do. They focus on the balance of credibility and how that's going to impact their audience. The second thing effective communicators do to show their credibility, confidence, and influence is they manage their personal state. This, I'm sure, is no surprise to you. Confidence is an inside job. Now, yes, we could have a chat about power poses and doing work on your voice and practical tips, but I'm sure that you've done programs like that before. You can Google that information. The biggest shift is going to be you doing the work on the inside so that you're buying what you're selling, as I said. Now, the problem with that, and interestingly, when I work even with some of Australia's most senior leaders, they doubt themselves as much as anybody else. The difference is they've been able to implement some techniques that help them move through that. I've been a professional communicator for most of my career, and I've got to tell you, I'm actually a raging introvert, and I have a very severe critical voice in my head. You know, your alter ego who just wants to second guess everything you do. For some, you might call it your imposter syndrome. For others, it will just be a nagging voice. I actually call mine Darlene. Apologies to any Darlenes who are out there. It's just a name that came to me. And I imagine Darlene, her mouth's really turned down, and she folds her arms and she looks at me and says, "You can't do that. What makes you think those people will take any notice of you? Who are you to be standing up there and talking?" And so over the years, Darlene used to absolutely cripple me. She had the upper hand, and I would listen to Darlene and she would overwhelm me. But over the years, I've actually learned to recognize Darlene as somebody she's actually trying to keep me safe. This goes right back to when I worked in television. I warn you, I'm going to put some rather terrifying images on the screen. So if you've got a queasy stomach, you might want to look away. Because when I started in television, our pay packet was much smaller than our hair and our shoulder pads. Let me demonstrate. Oh, that's scary, isn't it? But even back then, even though I was in the public eye, Darlene was constantly in my ear, telling me, on like this. I recognized that she was trying to keep me safe. Of course, you've heard this before. That critical voice, that imposter syndrome voice, goes right back to our prehistoric brains, back when safety was really, really important. We couldn't step outside our cave without risk of being eaten by an animal. And so that voice in our mind made us question everything we did so that we could be particularly cautious. But you know, we don't need that anymore. So I can just say to Darlene, thanks very much for being on duty, Darlene, but you can stand down for today. I'm doing a presentation here that's so important for the people in this audience. I really want them to take value from what I'm saying, so you're not required. So I wonder what techniques you have for managing your personal state, because anytime you need to communicate with confidence, presence, and influence, you need to bring those tools to the table so that whether it's a conversation, a meeting, a presentation, you can put everything else aside and focus 100% on that moment. For you, it might be meditation. Perhaps there are some meditators in the group. I love meditating. Perhaps it's doing some visual exercises. Dr. Adam Fraser's The Third Space is a great exercise to do. The Third Space, you can Google that if you're not aware of it. Sometimes I imagine an airport trolley full of luggage, because, you know, I haven't seen one of those in reality for a while. And I imagine that's the baggage I'm bringing into the meeting, even if it's virtual. And I just then leave it at the door. I just say, you can stay at the door. I don't need you here in this moment where I've got to be at my most confident and credible. That little mind trick can be really effective. But for me, one of the biggest keys to my confidence in the moment is controlling my breathing. Controlling my breathing. Again, this mightn't be new news to you, but it's incredible the number of leaders I coach who have not learned to breathe properly, and particularly don't breathe properly when they're under stress. So let's do a quick exercise. Are you up for it? Good. Would you please take your right hand? Now, I can't see you. I don't think anybody else can see you. I'm not sure, what your situation is where you're sitting, but let's assume no one can see you. Take your right hand, and I'd like you to place it on your stomach. On your stomach. Can you do that? Just slightly. Take your left hand and place it on your chest. So right hand on the stomach, left hand on the chest. You with me? And now I'd like you to take 3 deep breaths, as deep as you can, in. Just a couple of breaths, in and out. Let's take 3. And I want you to notice as you're breathing, which of your hands is moving more? Is it the right hand on your stomach? Is it the left hand on your chest? Or are they both about the same? And Brenda's got a third poll question for us here that I invite her to put up now. Would you just answer that question for me? Which of your hand was moving more then? Your right hand on your stomach, left hand on your chest, or were both moving about the same? Let's do a little scientific experiment and see what happened there. Okay, fantastic. All right. So we've got a bit of a mixed bag, haven't we? Quite a few with right hand, quite a few with left hand, both moving equally, is kind of inching up as well. If I was a race caller, I'd be able to do this. Thanks for playing along. You're a fantastic audience. Brilliant. Okay. Well, I know the results are still coming in, but I'm just going to share with you that the correct answer, and there is a correct answer in this case, is your right hand on your stomach. Because what I want to encourage you to do is breathe deeply down into your stomach. This is diaphragmatic breathing, so that when you take a breath in, that you put your hand on your stomach needs to come out because you're filling it with air. And then when you breathe out, this takes a little bit of practice, your stomach goes in and the air comes right down from inside you and out. So if you do yoga, if you do meditation, if you've had singing lessons, you'll be all over this. You'll know that that's the way you do diaphragmatic breathing. But a lot of people don't know. And they particularly forget when they're under stress. You just have to watch TV interviews with political leaders, particularly inexperienced ones who are nervous. And what do you notice? They're taking shallow breaths up into their chest. Maybe even in job interviews, you notice people doing that. And then the rash starts, doesn't it? And that's a sign that the person is taking shallow breaths. And what happens then? Our voice gets thin and high, and now we're not sounding very credible. So if you take one thing away from today, and I know it's pretty obvious, right? You've signed up for this thing and I've told you to breathe. A big deal. But it's transformational. Leaders who haven't practiced this, who take this on board, it changes everything in their physiology, in their pacing, in the tone of their voice, and it introduces more of that lovely cat-like quality, particularly for people who are a little bit more on the puppy side, who are a bit more frenetic in their communication, who need to demonstrate that credibility. Now, I mentioned I've worked with very senior leaders. In 2020, I spent much of that year driving back and forth from Canberra, because you still could, working with this man, General Angus Campbell. And if he looks familiar, it's because he's the chief of our Defence Force. And in November 2020, he had the job of stepping up and presenting to Australia a pretty horrible report, the Afghanistan report, on alleged war crimes by some of our most elite soldiers. So by any stretch of the imagination, a critical and high stakes piece of communication. I worked with General Campbell for most of the year, helping him to prepare for what was going to be a very, very big event and a very nerve-wracking event. And I've got to tell you, we went through exactly the concepts I've been talking to you about. The balance of credibility, because being a tall general in uniform, he had a lot of the competence, but he needed to build connection with the audience. We talked about managing his personal state, even down to the breathing. Even though he's a very experienced soldier, former SAS himself, stepping up in front of a live stream media conference is a completely different situation. And so we went back and did some of those things. Now, the outcome of that, you might have seen some of that media conference, it was unprecedented, because even though the report was shocking, hard-nosed journalists from the ABC, the Herald, the Australian, used words to describe General Campbell like dignified, compelling, credible. How did he pull that off? Well, he paid attention to some of the characteristics we're talking about today. And you can do the same. You can absolutely do the same. Just to finish off, and I'm going to spend least amount of time on this now, is the third element that effective leaders pay attention to if you're wanting to be more confident and credible and influential. And it's this. It's putting clarity before celebrity. Now, that might sound a bit strange in a local government context, but what I mean by that is, now that you're focusing on your content, because we've talked about the audience, we've talked about your state, now we're actually focusing on your content. A lot of people try to put as much complexity and important sounding language as they can into their content, thinking that that will elevate their credibility. But the opposite is actually the case. So rather than trying to sound important, try to build your celebrity, even if you're not doing that deliberately, through your words, go for clarity. Make it as clear and plain as possible so that your audience doesn't have to work hard. By your audience, that can mean the other person in the meeting, the people in the meeting room, your counselors, whoever it is. They don't have to work hard. Now, some of that will come from preparation. If I were to say to you, next time you're going to come and present for an hour in this session, you'd probably spend some time preparing for a presentation like that. But in my experience, we don't tend to afford the same respect in terms of preparation to important conversations or even meetings that we do to presentations. So I really encourage you to take some of these concepts and even spend 10 minutes more preparing. Preparation leads to competence. Competence builds confidence. Think about the structure. If I had time, we could go into more detail around the structure of your content. I'm a great believer in the rule of three. You can Google that. There's a reason why there were 3 bears and not 4 or 2. The human brain can easily absorb and remember 3 pieces of information. So take your content, break it down into 3 chunks. You'll have a much more likelihood that your audience will connect and absorb that information, and you'll come across as credible and competent. Make sure that you rehearse out loud at least a couple of times, even in a conversation or a meeting. Rehearse it, and keep your eye on the outcome. Be very clear before you go in, even in a one-on-one conversation. Decide to yourself beforehand, what is it that I want to walk away from this meeting with? You mightn't necessarily get everything you want, but focusing on that outcome is a very effective way, again, of taking that focus off yourself. You cannot be self-conscious if you're focused on the end result or you're focused on your audience. So always try to focus off yourself. You'll immediately drop some of the characteristics that might be signaling to the others that you're not entirely confident. So I've shared briefly 3 concepts around balance of credibility, focusing on the audience, focusing on your personal state, including your breathing, and then finally focusing on your content. Usually we do it the other way around, don't we? Got to say something important. What's my content? I recommend you do that last. And I love acronyms, so this is a good way for you to remember it. It's not FYI. It's TYI. If you don't make your message clear, you'll be the kind of person Oscar Wilde described like this. Some cause happiness wherever they go, others whenever they go. You don't want to be that person. So quick acronym to help you remember the formula. It's not FYI, it is T, which stands for them, your audience. Focus on your audience first. Then you, your state. What have you got to do to get yourself in the optimal state? Finally, followed by I, the it, your content. And that is the process for ensuring that you're demonstrating as much confidence, credibility, and influence in the moment. And just to close off, I just want to remind you that we in local government are in an incredible position. You create experiences. This is back when I worked at Shell Harbour City Council. We were doing a world record attempt at the time warp. So this is hundreds of people in a suburban street doing It's Just a Jump to the Left. And I remember looking up, and as far as the eye could see, people were doing that and thinking, we created this moment. Those kids in that photo are going to tell their kids of the day they did the world record attempt. And in local government, we're creating experiences all the time. As a leader, as an aspiring leader, you're in the box seat. Don't hide your light under a bushel. You're all amazing. So this is the year for you to step into your greatness, into your credibility, your confidence, and influence. Thanks so much for being here. And Catherine, I'd love now to hear what amazing questions we've got from this group.
Thank you so much, Neryl. And thank you also to everyone watching for your questions. It's been a completely fascinating and very instructive session. Neryl, also, thank you for being so very generous with your advice and for those excellent tips for success. I'm going to go now to questions, I think. Sorry, before we close, I do have a final poll question for everyone. Did you learn new career or leadership skills in today's webinar? We're going to ask this question after every webcast because we want to stay very focused on providing practical advice when we invite you to invest 50 minutes in your future on the first Tuesday of every month. I think I need to go back now to questions for Neryl before we close out. There are a few coming in, and I've got one that I'd like to ask first because it's something that is very common. It's a question I've asked previously, and it's one that comes up with a lot of people that I talk to. So the question is, how do I, or how do we generally get past imposter syndrome, that imposter syndrome so many of us struggle with, so that so that we can communicate more effectively?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine, and thanks, everybody. It's a great question, and it is so common. As I said, I work with a lot of leaders. I don't think I've met one yet who doesn't grapple with this, and I certainly grapple with it. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach, and it starts with recognizing that this is part and parcel of who we are. I don't think we can cure imposter syndrome, and I think it's about managing it daily. It's a bit like having a shower. You don't just do it once and say, well, that's done. It's something that you continually need to do. So do whatever works for you. But for me, it's been a combination. Journaling really helps when those thoughts come up. And generally, they're quite illogical. Writing them down so that I can look at them. Now they're separate from me. And I can look at them objectively and then look at them through the lens of a gun, attorney in court. If you were cross-examining that statement, being able to shoot down, okay, I'm telling myself this. Is this actually true? If it's true some of the time, is it actually true all of the time? Oh, no, really, it's not. Okay, so there are times when it's not true. Let's think about those times. That's really helped me. Back to what I said before about acknowledging that your imposter syndrome voice, or whatever you call it, Darlene in my case, is trying to keep me safe, misguided, annoying, unnecessary, but there nonetheless. And so even just recognizing that's been helpful for me, that this isn't something that needs to define me. It's not something that needs to take over my life. It's just something there that I can acknowledge and say, thanks for sharing, but you're not required anymore. Sometimes, Catherine and I were chatting before the session about a great technique is you could even imagine in the moment that you're somebody else. Imagine that I was Jacinda Ardern or somebody you really admire. How would how would they approach this situation? And just be them for a while. Just embody them and see what happens, and see if you can take on some of that confidence and capability. Because of course it's you all along. It's just giving yourself a little mind trick to step into a different persona. There are just a couple off the top of my head. There are many more, but I just really encourage all of you and anybody who is feeling this. Very, very normal, very, very common, has nothing to do with experience, time in the saddle, qualifications, job title. It's just part of being human. And so it doesn't need to actually hinder you in any way. There's lots of tools, like some of the ones I've mentioned, that can help.
Again, thank you so much. That advice around imposter syndrome and pretending to be someone else really resonates with me personally. It's something I've done in the past that I used to think was a bit crazy, but I understand is actually quite a common technique, and it's something I still do now. There are some really great questions coming through. I'll ask another one. Are women naturally less confident and influential communicators? What's your view about that?
Yeah, look, maybe I'm going to be a bit controversial here. No, I don't believe they are. And I work with leaders of all genders, and many of the men I work with have equally the same self-doubt. I was working with another male mayor last week. Terrible lack of self-confidence, huge amount of imposter voice coming through, and we really had to go back to basics to kind of strip that back. Look, I think probably just through learned behaviour, men in some circles have got a little bit better at being able to push through, a bit more with the bravado, but that doesn't actually mean that they're any more confident on the inside. So truly effective confidence comes from what you're generating in what I call your personal realm, the conversation you have only with yourself. It's the engine room that drives everything else, including your communication. So if you can stoke that fire, whether it's with affirmations and mantras, if we had time, I could tell you a story about how affirmations changed my life and probably saved my life about 18 years ago. Reading books, imagining somebody who is really in your corner. I've done that as well, and thinking, well, I don't feel confident, but I know that this person has faith in me. So if they were watching me, how would I behave? And that's really helped me. Back to the question though, no, I don't believe there's a difference. And I think that sometimes we may give ourselves a disservice by continually perpetuating that. I think perhaps as women, we're just better at talking about it and acknowledging it. But I think the conditions are the same for both genders.
There are quite a few really great questions coming through, and I'm going to come back to them, but I can't let you get away with learning affirmations saved your life. Can you speak briefly about that?
Okay. Look, I know that this whole idea of affirmations and mantras can sound a bit woo woo to some people, and I do understand that. But back in, I think it was about 2005, I'd gone through a terrible relationship breakup, and if you want to imagine the kind of violins playing at this moment, then that's fine. But I was really really devastated, and I was probably the lowest point I've ever been at in my life, and it was particularly brutal and done by text. Can you imagine? Anyway. Um, but so I went through a very very dark patch, and then I stumbled onto probably some books. I can't remember exactly, but that was the first time I'd been introduced to the concept that's now pretty obvious, that our thoughts actually create our reality, and that I had the ability. I didn't have to stay downtrodden and the person dumped by text and the loser and all the stuff I was telling myself. I completely had the power and the ability to change the narrative, to go, what we call above the line behavior, no longer the victim down there in despair, but now asking, what's possible, what might be possible next for me. And part of that was this idea of affirmations, just repeating the same statement over and over and over. And in my case, because this is how rock bottom I'd got, that statement was, I approve of myself. Nothing startling, not I'm the greatest, I'm the best. Just I approve of myself, because I didn't approve of myself. And I day after day and week after week, I would chant that mantra to myself. I'd be driving my car going, I approve of myself, I approve of myself. And that might sound ridiculous if you haven't tried affirmations, but I can tell you after a few weeks, not only did I feel so much better, people started to remark to me, what are you doing differently? You look amazing. There's a real glow about you. I noticed that people who were kind of negative in my life just dropped off the perch, and that completely changed my life. That process for me, and quite a bit later, I was able to contact that person who dumped me by text, a rotter, and I was able to say completely honestly to him, look, thank you, because even though that was terribly difficult for me at the time, you actually gave me the greatest gift. You actually opened up this new way of thinking for me that I'd never known before, that I actually can control the way I think, which in turn impacts everything about the way I come across to the world and the things that I bring into my life. It completely changed, all from me saying I approve of myself. Worth a try. May not be for everybody. It certainly was effective for me.
That's incredibly generous that you gave that feedback to someone who did you the discourtesy of communicating with you by text. But I think also it's a really brilliant observation. And I think affirmations can be useful in that way. I've heard those kinds of stories before. So for a lot of people, they're very positive experiences. Another quick one, someone's just asked if you could repeat the TYI acronym.
Yes, of course. And yes, I did rush that a little bit because my little clock was saying the time for my presentation was almost up. So the T is them. That's a reminder to you to focus first on who is it that I'm speaking to here. If it's a conversation, really think about the other person. How are they likely to be framing my message to them today? What's going on for them? Are they more of a dog communicator or a cat communicator? How can I adjust my style a little bit so that I can connect more with them? If it's in front of a bigger group, you can safely assume you'll have cats and dogs. So you need to sprinkle some moments where you're very strong and credible, and some moments where you're more vulnerable and connected. Think Jacinda Ardern. So that's the T. The Y is making sure you're also focusing on your personal state, so that when you're coming into a situation where you need to come across as confident and credible, you're not distracted. So this is not running into the meeting room still on your phone, checking your email from, earlier in the morning, or thinking about the argument you had with one of your kids, or whatever it is. It's using whatever technique, and breathing is a good one, to really center yourself and be present. With the Chief of Defence, we had to work on this because he's an incredibly busy man with a gazillion things of world security level importance going on. But in that media conference, he had to be 100% there. So that was a real focus. And that was, I'm sure, one of the elements that contributed to how effective he was on the day. And then finally, it's I, the actual content. That's the I is it. It is the content. It's the stuff you're going to say, whether that's in a conversation, presentation, sending an email. Consider that last. So audience first, then you, what's going to come across from you, and then the content, the it. TYI.
So Actually, we've got a really good follow-up question to that last one. This one's from Jessica Wu, and she says, I have a question about cat and dog type. If the audience is more cat-like, should I be more dog type or more cat-like? What do you think?
Great question, Jessica. Thanks so much. Yes, so this is about reading your audience. If your audience is predominantly cat-like people need to be impressed. So this is where you do need to channel your inner cat. If you're naturally cat-like, you can lean into that style. If you're naturally more puppy-like, as I am, this is where you need to say to yourself, think cat. Doesn't mean that cat-like people don't also like connection, but certainly they need that competence to come through. If you're in an audience that you think is more dog-like, you can be a little bit more connected and playful. If you're in a larger audience where you don't know the people, you have to assume you're going to have a mix of both. And Michael Grinder, whose concept that is, says that in his research, there are more dog-like people than cat-like people in the world. So you're going to have a greater percentage of dog-like people. So you need to be both. So don't be the dry disseminator or the likable lightweight. Have that balance of credibility.
Again, that's so interesting. We're going to close out today with two final questions. This one from Michelle McFadden. How would you suggest future leaders can gain experiences such as presenting in front of audiences?
Thanks, Michelle. Great question. Look, it is time in the saddle, absolutely. Is there a group of leaders in your council, for example, even 2 or 3 of you who could get together at lunchtime, once a fortnight or once a month, and just practice, pretend you're doing a presentation, just get some time in the saddle, practice some of these techniques. That delivery is going to give you competence. With the Chief of Defence, we rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed. Not that we had the full report, we were only working with information in the public domain, and not to become so glib and rehearsed that he came across in a robotic manner. It's about the more you practice and get confident on your feet, you then can start embodying your message so that on the day you can totally focus on being in that moment and interacting with the people in front of you. You're not actually trying to reach for the things that you're trying to say. So if the opportunities aren't there, create your own opportunities. You could also do things like going to Toastmasters. That's a great organisation for giving you practice. But I would simply create my own opportunities, or set yourself up on a video call and record yourself. That's hard. I know. I worked in television for a long time. Watching yourself is hard. But I tell you what, if you can get more comfortable with yourself doing that, an audience is going to be a piece of cake. So create your own opportunities.
These are fantastic tips. I completely agree, especially with creating your own opportunities if they don't come to you through your work or just naturally. This is the final question. It's actually a two-parter. We've got 3 minutes till we promised we would finish the session and let everyone go. So I'm going to put this together, a two-part question. Again, an issue that comes up quite often. How do women express confidence without being thought of as bossy or aggressive? And the second part of the question is, what's the best way to respond if you do get that kind of pushback, people saying that you are bossy or so on? What's your advice?
Yeah, so personally myself, I haven't ever been told that I'm bossy or pushy, and I think that I do have quite a driving personality, particularly when I've been a leader in local government. I don't think that this is so much a gender issue as a communication styles issue. So if you are getting that perception that you're coming across as being a bit too full on, I encourage you to learn more about communication styles in general. There's a fantastic model called People Styles at Work. People Styles at Work. It's not my model, it's somebody else's IP. You can Google that. It's online, and it will explain to you the 4 predominant styles of communication. And people who are perceived as coming across as bossy are often what's known as drivers. By learning about the other styles, you can start to see things from their perspective, and you can start to adjust your style so that you're more matching their style. So this comes back to knowing your audience. So I would never be held back by thinking, well, if I say that, I'm going to come across as bossy. You've got to own your point of view and you've got to own your voice. But if long term you feel that that's an issue for you, check out people's styles and see if there are things that you can do, not to change who you are or tone things down, but just to be more aware that not everybody has that driving style. And some styles will actually perceive that driving style as being quite over the top. So just it's really opening up your awareness to other people's perceptions. Catherine, can you remind me about the second part of the question? I was so into that first answer.
Oh, the second part of the question is, what do you do if you get that kind of feedback or you get that kind of pushback from people saying that you're bossy?
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? I wonder if people would actually say that to your face, or you just pick up the vibe. I would always approach it with curiosity, with the kind of mind of the scientist. I would find out more. Go and talk to that person and say, would you help me understand what you mean by that? Would you help me understand what it is about my manner in communicating that led to that comment or made you feel like that? I don't know any other way than actually opening up the channels of communication. Now that takes courage, but wow, imagine the gift you're giving that person if you actually sit down with them. First of all, it's going to make them think a little bit about what comments they might have made about you, but also you might get some really valuable feedback. So this is about being open. We're all, always open to learning more to be more effective communicators. So if that's getting in the way of your communication with somebody, I would go there and have that conversation with them. Imagine the trust and credibility you'll build with that person by having the guts to go and have that conversation. It could be remarkable, and you just might find something out that's really going to help you. I've been in this game for a very long time, more decades than I'd care to admit. You saw the big hair in the photos. I learn something every single day. Every day when I'm working with my clients, when I'm preparing for presentations like this, I learn something about communication, about interaction, about confidence every day. I invite you to have that curious mind rather than reacting and taking it as an affront, victim mode. Let's go above the line and say, well, isn't that interesting? What can I learn from that? How can I understand that better? And in understanding that better, how can I build myself up and give a gift more broadly as well?
Neryl, again, thank you for that advice. I think that's incredibly useful. Like you, I don't recall being told that I'm bossy, but I have been told that I'm very direct. And I think that's quite a feature often of women in senior leadership positions. And I think it's important often to open the conversation and say to people, what's your preferred communication style? What do you think? That open communication is really important and really a gift for facilitating better understanding between people. And closing out on that question leads to something I want to tell everyone about, which is next month we're going to address difficult conversations. How do you get the result you need without creating more problems than you resolve? And thank you to the viewer who made that excellent suggestion, which came through as well. If you'd like to suggest a topic for a future webinar, please connect with Local Government Professionals Australia. You can do that via our Facebook page or on LinkedIn. We're also going to be sharing a copy of today's webcast. We'll post that on our YouTube channel and also share it on social media. So you'll be able to revisit it and share it with your colleagues if you found it useful today. I'd like to again thank brilliant Neryl East for zooming in today to be part of the conversation, and to everyone that dialed in as well for your participation. I'm Catherine Carter, and I'll see you again next month.